On July 24th, 2023, a weather buoy floating in Manatee Bay at the southern tip of Florida transmitted a number that made scientists around the world stop and reread their screens. The buoy was not measuring the air, it was measuring the ocean. And the ocean, that evening, registered 1 degrees Fahrenheit, seawater in the open environment at the temperature of a hot tub. To be fair, the reading came from shallow, dark-bottomed coastal water, and researchers debated its technicalities, but nobody debated the pattern it crowned, because for weeks the seas around Florida had been running at temperatures that had no precedent in the record. Coral reefs were bleaching bone white in real time, and marine scientists were pulling samples of living coral out of the ocean and rushing them into land-based tanks like paramedics evacuating patients from a burning building. Now hold that image, the hot tub ocean, and let me tell you why it matters more than any hurricane you watched on the news that year. Because when people hear that the weather has reached a point no one alive has ever seen, they picture the loud things, the floods, the fire tornadoes, the storms with names. But the scientists who actually track this planet's vital signs will tell you the truly frightening evidence is quiet. It is a buoy in a bay. It is a graph of ocean heat that has set a new all-time record every single year for the better part of a decade, through El Niño and La Niña alike, without pausing. It is winters quietly losing their cold, nights that no longer cool down, seasons drifting off the calendar they have kept for 10,000 years, and an entire built civilization, every dam, drain, bridge, and city, engineered to the statistics of a climate that no longer exists. The loud disasters are the symptoms. Tonight, we go after the disease, the deep, silent shifts that no living person has ever witnessed before, the ones that explain why the disasters keep arriving, and the ones that will decide what the next 30 years look like. If deep, honest investigations into real threats are what you come here for, subscribe right now because we go this far into the actual science every single week. Start with the ocean, because the ocean is where the real story of the last 50 years has been hiding. Here is the single most underappreciated fact in all of climate science. Of all the extra heat that humanity's greenhouse gases have trapped around this planet, the amount that has gone into warming the air, the part we feel, the part the news reports, is only a few percent. More than 90% of it has gone into the ocean. The ocean is the planet's battery, silently absorbing an almost incomprehensible flow of energy. And scientists have calculated that flow, and the number is worth hearing even though it sounds like science fiction. The seas are currently taking up heat at a rate equivalent to several Hiroshima-scale atomic bombs of energy every second, around the clock, for decades, and accelerating. That is why the global ocean has now set a new record for total stored heat, year after year after year. An unbroken streak, regardless of what any single season does on land. And a battery that charged is a battery that discharges. Warm oceans are the fuel line feeding everything the atmosphere throws at us, the moisture in the floods, the energy in the storms, the humidity in the heat waves. But the ocean is not just a fuel tank, it is a living world, and it is now experiencing its own version of extreme weather, events researchers call marine heat waves, vast regions of sea running feverishly hot for weeks or months. And they have been described accurately as the wildfires of the ocean, invisible from shore, devastating beneath the surface. In 2023, the North Atlantic ran so hot that its temperature line on scientists' charts pulled completely away from every previous year ever plotted, a lonely curve in empty space. And the consequences are not abstract. Between 2023 and 2025, the world's coral reefs entered the largest global bleaching event ever recorded, with heat stress striking more than 4/5 of the planet's reef. Areas, the nurseries that support a quarter of all marine life and the coastal livelihoods of 1 billion people. And if you want a single story that shows how fast an ocean ecosystem can fall, consider the snow crab. In the late 2010s, a marine heat wave swept the Bering Sea off Alaska, and in its aftermath, surveys revealed something fishermen refused at first to believe. Billions of snow crabs, an estimated 10 billion. Animals, the overwhelming majority of the population, had simply vanished, starved in water too warm for their cold-adapted metabolism. And for the first time in history, the entire fishery was canceled, erasing livelihoods across Alaskan ports in a single announcement. No one alive had ever seen the ocean do that. The ocean had never been asked to. Now come ashore and watch what is happening to the architecture of the year itself, because the seasons you were raised with are quietly being rewritten. The most consistent signal in the entire climate record is not the ferocity of summer. It is the retreat of winter. Across the northern hemisphere, the coldest season is warming faster than any other, and you can measure its decline in 100 small obituaries. Lakes that froze reliably for centuries of recorded history now skip ice years entirely. Snow seasons are shortening at both ends, starving the spring snowpack that entire regions depend on for summer water. The frost days that once killed off insect pests each year are disappearing, which is why forests from the Rockies to the Appalachians are being chewed hollow by beetles that the cold used to keep in check. Record cold still happens, but it is becoming a statistical endangered species, overwhelmed year after year by record warmth. And as winter retreats, everything anchored to it drifts. The official plant hardiness map of the United States, the one gardeners and farmers plant by, was redrawn in 2023. And in roughly half the country had shifted measurably warmer, entire growing zones migrating north within a single generation. Spring now arrives days to weeks earlier than it did within living memory, flowers opening before their pollinators wake. Birds arriving after the insect feast they timed their migrations to has already peaked, when allergy season across North America now runs roughly 3 weeks longer than it did in 1990, with far more pollen in the air, a change your own sinuses may have documented better than any journal. None of this trends on social media. All of it is unprecedented in the instrumental record. The calendar is not what it was, and no one alive has farmed, planted, hunted, or lived through seasons behaving this way before. And then there is the change that may be the deadliest of all, precisely because it happens while everyone is asleep. The nights are dying too. One of the clearest fingerprints of greenhouse warming, predicted decades ago, and now confirmed on every continent, is that nights are warming faster than days. The physics is straightforward. A thicker blanket of greenhouse gases and added humidity slows the escape of heat after sunset. And the consequence is measured in lives because the human body treats night as its recovery window. In the great heat waves of the past, the killer was rarely the afternoon peak alone. It was the string of nights that never cooled that denied the body its chance to shed the day's accumulated heat. And it is exactly that mercy, the cool of the evening, that the new climate is eliminating first. Cities feel it worst of all, their concrete and asphalt hoarding daytime heat and radiating it back through the small hours. And around the world, minimum nighttime temperatures are breaking records more often and by larger margins than daytime highs. Whole regions now experience tropical nights that never fall below temperatures once considered warm afternoons, in places where such a thing had never been recorded. Your grandparents' world reliably cooled after dark, everywhere, every summer. Yours, increasingly, does not. That is a planetary change, achieved in one lifetime, invisible in any single forecast, and written across every thermometer on Earth. There's one more quiet number moving in the background, and it may end up rearranging more of the human world than any storm ever filmed. The ocean is rising. You know that. Everyone knows that. And that is precisely the problem, because familiarity has made it invisible. And the actual measurements from the last few years tell a story very different from the slow, distant creep most people imagine. Since 1993, satellites have measured the height of the global ocean with exquisite precision, bouncing radar off the sea surface millions of times a day, and their verdict is unambiguous. The rise is not steady. It is accelerating. The rate today is roughly double what it was when the measurements began, a single generation ago, driven by two engines running simultaneously, the meltwater pouring off Greenland and Antarctica, and the simple physical swelling of seawater as it absorbs all that Hiroshima per second heat we talked about, because warm water takes up more room than cold water. And the place to see what acceleration means is not a tide chart. It is a sunny afternoon in a coastal city. Across the American coastline, and especially along the Gulf and Southeast, a phenomenon with an almost comically gentle name has been multiplying. Sunny day flooding, seawater rising up through storm drains and over seawalls under clear blue skies. No storm anywhere, just an ordinary high tide arriving on top of an ocean that is now measurably taller than the one the streets were graded for. Cities like Miami and Charleston and Norfolk now experience many times more of these clear sky flood days than they did in the year 2000. Ocean water bubbling up through the drains into shopping districts, salting lawns, corroding the undersides of buildings, on days when the weather report says nothing but sunshine. And beneath the visible water moves an invisible twin, because as the sea rises, it also presses inland underground, pushing salt into the freshwater aquifers that coastal communities drink from and lifting the water table beneath low-lying neighborhoods until septic systems fail and foundations sit in brine, damage that no flood insurance map was drawn to anticipate. No dramatic footage will ever come from any single one of these afternoons, but stack them year over year, and they are the leading edge of the largest slow emergency on Earth, because the same satellite record that documents the acceleration also supports a hard truth, that sea level responds to warming with enormous inertia, meaning the rise now underway is the response to the heat already banked in the ocean, and the decisions of this decade are quietly setting the coastline that children born today will inherit as elders. A person born in 1940 has watched the global ocean climb throughout their entire life and accelerate in their retirement. No generation before them ever watched the sea itself change speed. Yours is watching it too, every clear sky flood at a time. At this point, a fair question arises. How do we actually know all this, and how long have we known? The answer is one of the great scientific detective stories of the modern age, and it begins with one stubborn young researcher on the side of a volcano. In 1958, a scientist named Charles David Keeling installed an instrument high on Mauna Loa in Hawaii, in air so remote and well mixed it represents the whole atmosphere, and began doing something nobody had done with such precision before, measuring exactly how much carbon dioxide the air contained day after day without interruption. His first readings hovered around 315 parts per million. Almost immediately, his data revealed something beautiful, a gentle annual sawtooth, the concentration falling each northern hemisphere summer as the great forests inhaled, rising each winter as they exhaled. Keeling had discovered that the planet breathes, and his instrument was its stethoscope. But beneath that graceful breathing, year over year the line climbed, and climbed. Keeling kept measuring for the rest of his life, fighting off budget cuts and skeptics, and when he died, his son Ralph took over the record, and the line, now known simply as the Keeling curve, has never once bent downward in nearly 70 years. Today, it stands near 430 parts per million. And here is where the detective story deepens, because scientists could then ask the ice. Air bubbles trapped in the glaciers of Antarctica and Greenland preserve actual samples of ancient atmosphere, and when researchers drilled down through hundreds of thousands of years of ice and measured them, they found that in all that vast archive, through ice ages and warm ages alike, carbon dioxide had never, not once, reached anywhere near the level of the modern curve. The conclusion is not a model or a theory. It is two direct measurements, the volcano and the ice, agreeing that the air you are breathing tonight is unlike any air any human being has ever breathed. And the temperature records, the ocean heat, the dying winters and warming nights are simply the planet responding to it, exactly as the physics said it would. Which brings us to the most consequential sentence ever published in a water engineering journal, and I promise that is less boring than it sounds because your safety is built on it. In 2008, a team of prominent hydrologists published a paper in the journal Science with a title that read like an obituary. Stationarity is dead. Stationarity is the assumption, quiet, ancient, and universal, that the statistics of the past define the envelope of the future, that the biggest flood in 100 years of records tells you the biggest flood to plan for. Every dam on Earth was sized by that assumption. Every storm drain beneath your street, every culvert under every highway, every floodplain map, every reservoir, every building, code. Civilization is, in a very literal sense, a bet on stationarity, trillions of dollars of concrete poured to the specifications of yesterday's weather. And the hydrologist's point, 17 years ago, was that the bet was already lost, that a warming climate had invalidated the old statistics, and that continuing to design the future from the past was engineering malpractice. Since then, the evidence has only piled higher, so-called 100-year floods returning within a decade of each other, 1,000-year rainfall events striking the same country multiple times in a single summer, dams and drainage systems meeting storms carrying far more water than their designers were ever told to imagine. When you see a modern city drown under a single afternoon of rain, you are not usually watching a failure of forecasting or response. You're watching a perfectly functioning system meet a climate it was never built for. That is the precise technical meaning behind this video's title. The point no one alive has ever seen is not just on the thermometer. It is in the gap, widening every year, between the world our infrastructure assumes and the world the sky now delivers. Now the pushback, because it deserves a straight answer. You will hear that the scientists are alarmists, and their models can't be trusted. Here is the uncomfortable truth for that argument. The models have been tested against reality for half a century, and they passed. The projections made in the 1970s and 1980s, including, remarkably, the internal forecasts produced by Exxon's own scientists, predicted the warming path the planet then followed with striking accuracy, decades in advance. The physicist who built the first credible climate models, Shukuro Manabe, received the Nobel Prize in Physics for work whose predictions the real world went on to confirm. If anything, the record shows the models erring in the other direction, underestimating how fast Arctic ice would retreat and how violently the oceans would run hot. And you will hear that it is the sun, some natural brightening driving it all, which has the virtue of being directly checkable because satellites have monitored the sun's output for over 40 years, and over precisely the period of the sharpest warming, solar output has been flat to slightly declining. The sun is, if anything, gently arguing the other way. The evidence is not a consensus of opinion. It is a convergence of independent instruments, volcano and ice core, satellite and buoy, thermometer and tide gauge, all telling one story from different rooms. So what do you do, living on the far side of the point of no living memory? Beyond the storm day basics, build for the quiet shifts, because those are the ones this script has been about. Learn your water. where it comes from, what happens to it in a bad year, because water is the medium through which almost every climate impact will reach your life. Plant, garden, and farm by the new map, not your grandfather's. And favor variety, because diversity is the oldest insurance policy in agriculture. Take nights seriously in heat season, cooling your body before sleep, checking on those who live alone, because the data says darkness is no longer the protection it was. Get to know your neighbors, genuinely, because every disaster researcher will tell you that in the crunch, community is the infrastructure that never fails to matter. And guard your own mind, because the honest response to all of this is not doom, it is engagement. And psychologists studying climate anxiety consistently find that the antidote is not looking away, it is doing something, almost anything, in the direction of the problem. The weather has reached a point no one alive has ever seen, but now you know where to look for the proof, and it is not only in the wreckage after the storm. It is in a buoy reading like a hot tub, a crab fishery canceled, a hardiness map redrawn, a night that never cooled, a curve on a volcano that has climbed without pause since 1958. The loud catastrophes come and go, the quiet numbers only move one way, and they are the ones writing the future. Subscribe now if you want stories like this every week, told straight, with the real science and none of the hype. Drop a comment telling me the quiet change you have noticed in your own lifetime, the winters, the seasons, the nights, because those observations are data too, and share this with someone who thinks climate change is only about distant storms. The biggest changes are the ones nobody films. Before you go, one final chapter, because there's a counterweight to everything you just heard, and it is one of the least told good stories of our era. At the exact moment the planet's systems began shifting beyond living memory, humanity quietly built something no generation ever possessed, the ability to watch it happen everywhere, all at once. Right now, nearly 4,000 robotic floats called Argo drift through the world's oceans, diving and surfacing on endless patrol, reporting the sea's temperature and chemistry from places no ship visits, which is the only reason we can state the ocean's fever in hard numbers at all. Satellites weigh the ice sheets from orbit by sensing their gravity. Instruments strung across the Atlantic stand watch over the great ocean circulation itself, listening for any early signs of the slowdown scientists are working urgently to understand, so that this civilization, unlike everyone before it, would not be surprised. We are the first generation to see the planet change like this, and that sentence cuts both ways, because we are also the first generation capable of seeing it, measuring it, attributing it, and acting on it with our eyes open. The Keeling curve still climbs, but the technologies that can finally bend it, clean power, storage, electrified everything, are scaling faster than almost any forecaster dared project a decade ago, and the same models that earned their credibility predicting this crisis agree on one more thing, that the moment emissions truly fall, the warming level's off. Within decades, not centuries. The ocean will hold its heat for a long time, and some changes are now ours to live with. But the size of what comes after, the height of the curve, the fate of the winters and the reefs and the nights, is still being decided, this decade, by the species holding the stethoscope. No one alive has ever seen weather like this. No one alive has ever had this much power to change what comes next either. Both of those facts are true. Choose which one you act on.